When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
This is Cindy Burnett. Welcome to my award-winning podcast, Thoughts from a Page, a member of the Evergreen Podcasts Network. On this show, I chat with authors whose books I have enjoyed about their new releases, and others in the book world about the books that they have loved. With so many books coming out weekly, it can be hard to decide what to read, so I find the best ones and share them with you. Do you love to be in the know about upcoming books? Kelly Hooker of Kelly Hook Reads Books, and I do too. We couldn't find a comprehensive list of titles all in one place, so we made one ourselves, and now we're sharing it with you. Our third literary lookbook is a list of a whopping 584 titles releasing from January to May 2025, curated for our communities. The link to buy it is in my show notes. Today, Marissa Stapley joins me to chat about The Lightning Bottles. This is one of my favorite books of 2024. I always enjoy stories that are set in the music industry or around musicians, and this one is no exception. It's a definite standout in that genre. Marissa is a New York Times bestselling author of Lucky, which was the first ever Canadian Reese's Book Club pick. Many of her novels have been optioned for television, and her journalism has appeared in publications across North America. She lives in Toronto with her husband, 2 children, and the best cat in the world. I hope you enjoy our conversation.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Hi there, I'm Heather Drago.
And I'm Sarah Saunders.
We host the podcast, That's a Hard No, about saying no and setting boundaries.
So you can become that true and empowered you that this world needs. Saying no isn't just okay.
It's the key to living an authentic, fulfilling life.
I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor, so while this podcast is in no way a replacement for one-on-one therapy, I suppose I know what I'm talking about.
I'd say so. We talk about learning to say no and set healthy boundaries and how it impacts mental health, physical health, relationships, parenthood, and more.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit our website, hardnopodcast.com.
We're here to help you find your no and say it unapologetically.
That's a hard no.
Welcome, Marissa. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well as well, and I loved The Lightning Bottles, so I cannot wait to chat with you about it.
Thank you so much. I love hearing that.
Well, I usually ask authors to give me a quick synopsis so that those that haven't read it yet will know what the book's about. So can you do that for The Lightning Bottles?
Absolutely. So The Lightning Bottles tells the story of Jane Pyre and Elijah Hart, 2 musicians, also a husband and wife, who are in a band called The Lightning Bottles. Think like the White Stripes meets Kurt and Courtney. I had many musical muses for them, which I'm sure we'll talk about. The book begins 5 years after Elijah's disappearance at the height of the Lightning Bottles' stratospheric alternative grunge 90s music fame. Jane is completely been vilified by the media, familiar story, female musician or pop star. She's trying to get out of the spotlight. She's so sick and tired of being blamed for her husband's death. Does not bargain for a teenage super fan living next door to her country idol and believing that she knows that where Elijah Hart or that he's alive and trying to leave street art clues for Jane across all of the European cities they toured when they were at the height of their fame and happiest.
I have so many questions and about many things that you just mentioned, so I will start working my way through them. But the first is actually kind of a silly small one. Do you call two people a band? Because I was really struggling with that. Like when I was writing about your book, I recommended it as one of my buzz reads for this column that I write in Houston. And when I posted on Instagram, and I was like, are two people a band?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The back jacket copy of the book calls them the, grunge rock duo. But I think thinking about the White Stripes, they're called a band, even though it's Jack and Meg White. And there were only ever two of them, which always fascinated me, which is why I wanted to do the duo. So yeah, I think you can be a band. I mean, there's a one-man band. That's a thing too. So.
Well, that's true. And I'm glad to hear that because I actually looked at the back of your book to see how they referred to them. And they said duo. So I avoided band. But then I was thinking like Panic at the Disco. I mean, he's now a band and he's just Brendan Urie. I mean, he had all those people before, but it's just him now. And as you said, White Stripes. So, okay, good. Well, I'm going to feel free to now use the word band when I'm talking about your book. I just truly didn't know and was so curious. So tell me how you came up with the ideas for this one. There are several things that kind of weave together. So how did you get started?
Okay, so I feel that many authors probably have sort of the book of their heart. We can never pick a favorite. It's, it's very true. It's like picking a favorite child if you have children or favorite dog if you have two dogs or, whatever it is, favorite book of all time. It's very hard. But this book living in my heart. I grew up in the 90s. I was very into the grunge alternative scene. I'm very, very into music. I have musicians in my family and it's just something that has always just been with me. Like, I've got to do this. But how to get into the story was a challenge. When Taylor Jenkins Reid wrote Daisy Jones and the Six, she's a close colleague. She was in Toronto and I was like, okay, I think I'm jealous. Like, I try not to. And she was like, well, whatever, hey, like, I didn't invent music books. You should write one someday. And I thought, okay, I will, but I need to, figure out how I'm going to tell this story. I knew I couldn't do it the way Taylor did it. I don't know how she did that. That was incredible how she pulled off the oral history. However, that is how I got my way into the story. I started just writing down interviews, memoir excerpts, diary entries, anything that I could sort of to find in my head to get to know these characters who had kind of arrived. Jane and Elijah were in my mind. And the story, just figuring out what their path was going to be, took a while. This story was with me these characters were with me for a good couple of years before the Banksy-esque street art treasure hunt thing came to me. And then I thought, gosh, I mean, I love a road trip novel. Like, you have me at road trip novel. I wrote one with Lucky and I could write, everyone could be a road trip novel. So I just kind of went from there, but it was hard. I think because it meant so much to me too, that book of your heart thing, you don't take it lightly.
I agree with that. I was so curious about the treasure hunt because that's an added element to the story, the mystery, what's happened to Elijah, all of that. And while I agree that Taylor Jenkins Reid did not invent the music story, she certainly paved the way for many more to come, which I am all here for.
Me too.
So the 90s music scene, as well as plenty of other music eras, are drug-fueled. And I'm always so surprised when I hear readers say, I don't want to read about drugs when they're picking up a story about those time periods in music, which clearly there was a lot of drug use. How did you approach writing about that?
So I wanted to be extremely realistic and respectful. And to do that, first of all, I did a ton of research into the, music scene, songwriting, 90s, even though I lived the era, but the drug addiction piece of it, I read memoirs, I spoke to people, I unfortunately have people in my life who have dealt with that or, mental health stuff. And I will say that the more research I did, the more I started to think, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I don't know if I can write an entertaining novel with the level of drug use that there was in the 90s alternative scene that often had the most tragic results. And so it was hard. And there was one draft where I really backed off of it. And I was like, maybe he just sort of takes a few pills. I had watched Walk the Line and I was like, that's so much more pleasant than heroin use. And my editors were like, what's happening here? And I was like, well, he doesn't have to do heroin. And they were like, pretty sure he does have to. So it was tough, and I shied away from it. And then, I read some more memoirs, and like every single memoir I read, except for Patty Schmel of Hole, the drummer, everyone ended up dying. And I thought, all right, I need to stop trying to make this real, because the reality is harsh. And I need to provide the escape hatch, which is kind of the point of the whole novel. And it's, my novels always have redemption, a complex sort of happy ending. So to do that, I just almost had to skate over the surface of certain things. But trust me, like, it was only to protect my reader, because if you know, you know. And if you don't know, you don't probably need to go there when you're just trying to be entertained.
Absolutely. I do feel like it had to be a fine line. But if you didn't have it there, people would be like, this is so unrealistic.
Yeah.
Well, tell me more about your research, not the drug stuff, because we've already talked about that, but the more exciting things.
Yes. So, I actually went into writing this novel thinking, well, I won't need to do that much research because I'm a 90s kid and I was, roadie for my brother's band and like know all the bands inside out, went to like every concert, musicians in the family. And it's funny because I've never done more research. Like, what you think you know, you don't actually. So, every single piece of writing I could get about, for example, Jeff Buckley, who was one of the muses for Elijah, Kurt Cobain, all of the stories and the great memoirs that are now coming out that female musicians are writing about being a musician during that era, or really any era. It was fascinating, sometimes a little bit frustrating, to say the least. There was one particular memoir I could not believe that I was even reading what I was reading, which was Anthony Kiedis of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. The bragging about statutory rape that happens in so many male rock star memoirs. And I don't know that we're fully addressing it. Like, I was kind of waiting for interviews to say like, hey, this guy's getting a biopic, but like publish something where he's just like casually talks about having sex with a 14-year-old, finding out how old she is, having sex with her again, and driving her home. Like, this is not okay. We really need to start saying that this, just because it somehow was okay at the time, is not okay. So there's all this, stuff that was coming at me during my research. But eventually I really, I had to stop. I hadn't read enough books to go up to the roof of my office, and it's a high ceiling in there. And I did have to start turning to my own memories. And I kept very detailed journals back then. So that was fun to revisit my teenage escapades in the 90s grunge scene.
I bet it was. I love so many of those bands. So I think that was why your book really spoke to me. I want to talk later about females in the music industry. And let's talk a little bit more about what you just brought up as well, males. But before we do that, I'd love to talk about the inspiration for Jane and Elijah. You just mentioned one person, but who else?
So you think, okay, Kurt and Courtney, which of course, yes, like the little seed of the idea, I was like, what if I could rewrite that story in so many different ways? But it always is the case when you're kind of drawing from real life, your characters take on a life of their own. And I mentioned Jeff Buckley. He definitely almost haunted me in many ways while I was writing. And, that voice of an angel, the tattered charm that he has. Sinead O'Connor was a big one for Jane, because just that, woman who just is who she is and is completely vilified, and the media just says whatever they want and can't really fight back, which is kind of what happened to Sinead, which was devastating for me personally because I was such a fan. And then the book is dedicated to so many female musicians from that era who I really feel, even in the way we memorialize the scene, are strangely sidelined. You'd think that grunge alternative was just a bunch of white guys playing guitars, and it is not. There are women. The actual godmother of grunge is a Black woman named Tina Marie Bell, who just Google, please. Like, this is so important that we start talking about the females, the female identifying people, the people of color in that scene. They all inspired everything about these characters. But Jane was my real focus, even though Elijah's obviously important. So yeah, she's just, I wanted to do every female musician in that scene justice with her.
Absolutely. And, that's something that we see everywhere. And it's just crazy, like history, wherever you're pulling from. It's the men that they're always talking about. And I just love that slowly these stories about the forgotten women are coming out. And I loved Jane. I loved her story. I felt so bad for her because she really had no one to turn to. And she was treated so poorly by the industry, by the fans, by everyone.
Yeah, and I wish that I could say, yeah, well, I just made it up. But often I would do something in a scene with Jane that I had pulled out of like Sinead O'Connor's memoir, and just because I wanted to be able to say, look, this happened, this does happen. So, I mean, all we have to do, is look at the present day. Chappelle Roan she gives me such Jane Pyre vibes because of the way she has basically been like, look, I'm asking for boundaries. I am not going to smile and be nice when some photographer is calling me a bitch, right? And she's so right. She is so incredibly right. And I just see such power and badassery in what she's doing. But then I just want her to stay strong in the face of this, because this is hard work that still needs to be done. And I think the discourse surrounding her is, very much, I've boiled it down in Jane Pyre's story, I think.
Yes, she takes the heat for absolutely everything, so much of what is not her responsibility at all.
Right. Like Chappelle is a 26-year-old woman, and, do a Google News search on her and it's like, why hasn't she, weighed in on the election? I'm like, please, I don't need a young woman to tell everyone who to vote for. Like, that's not her job. And it's not fair. And it happens all the time, particularly with female artists.
Well, and like Jane, I mean, she just ends up having so many things coming at her all the time. And I loved then that you had her move to someplace remote. She ends up next door to a super fan, which had to feel so healing for her, to somebody who was excited to see her and wanted to know her, and that the two of them bond and learn from each other.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean so the prologue where we essentially are thrown into that situation, and that actually probably made me more nervous than the drugs. I understand, coincidences can be very annoying, especially when they feel like a tool. And I really, oh gosh, I probably spent more time on that prologue than anything else in the book, because I believe in kismet. There are strange coincidences that happen to me all the time. I don't know why they happen. And I've just started to tell myself it's because I need to keep the faith in the magic of storytelling. And it is magic, right? So I know something like that could happen. And especially with a band that famous worldwide, I mean, it wouldn't be beyond the realm of, what you would believe to think that your neighbor is a huge fan. But there's magic there for me that sort of starts the story. And then I just love the way Hen and Jane then, revealed their relationship to me as I put them on that road trip. Because I didn't sit down and go, okay, here are the parallels. Here's how they're similar. Here's what Jane is going to feel like. That was a really interesting organic part of the story where I thought, oh gosh, Jane she has these connections to this person that I never would have even thought about. I think I would have more been like, they're so different, but they're going to find common ground. And then they sit in a car together. And I'm like, no, they're connected in this beautiful way. And we are all connected. So.
And I agree with you on coincidences, and I do think truth is stranger than fiction. But if you just think about anybody like Kurt Cobain or today, Beyonce or Taylor Swift, like if that person moved next door to almost anyone, especially a teenager, they're going to know them.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So I don't think that is that's strange at all. Like that did not even ring. I didn't even think about that.
Well, but yeah, I think I just love it. I mean, I love the little things that have happened to me, and particularly when you really get into the real nitty gritty of storytelling. I know so many authors who say like this weird thing happened, or I saw like a person who looked just like my character and followed them. Like I don't know what's going on. The big magic of it all is I believe in it. And it's one of the most fun parts of what I do.
I agree with that. And it's interesting to hear those stories from authors about seeing somebody that looks like a character, or their character telling them something, or something coming to light that hasn't been discovered before right as they're writing the book. I mean, there are just so many coincidences like that. Mm-hmm. So we talked about females in the music industry, but we really didn't talk about the male flip part of that, how they get a pass and how people don't think twice about somebody having sex with a 14-year-old girl, which even then should have been a big problem. And it's frustrating.
Yeah. It is frustrating. I laugh because otherwise I found myself really frustrated. I think, a few things happened as well. Recently, the Blake Lively drama. And, I understand Blake Lively's not perfect. I've said this so many times in interviews, like, but why does she have to be perfect? Who cares if she's perfect? Who cares if she had a bad day? Like, why can't women be unlikable? It happens with fictional characters too. we're not interested in giving the redemption arc. Whereas, you look at Dave Grohl, this time next year, he's going to be walking around with his baby in a snuggly and everyone's going to be like, he really is everybody's dad. We love him. Like, we're just so much more willing to give that to male pop culture figures. And I'm really unclear personally on why that is, because I don't and have never engaged in it. So I'm wondering if there are people who are like, I feel this way. I like Dave Grohl better than I like X, Y, and Z. I could forgive a male. We need to interrogate why that is, because it really has to stop. I don't think it's fair that, Taylor Swift has to work 25,000 times harder than anyone else to stay in control of her own narrative and her life. It's not fair. She should be allowed to be a tiny bit messy, and she's not. And it's disturbing and alarming. And it seems to keep happening over and over, because I'm writing about the 90s, and that was a long time ago, because some people are calling this historical fiction, which, by the way, makes me want to turn into a pile of dust.
Well, and I laugh. I'm like, it's not historical fiction. It's the 90s. You got to go back 50 years, people. So that's okay.
It's fine. But it keeps happening and it has to stop. I have a teenage daughter. It's that lens too of really, if some rock star had, I don't know, I wouldn't be here. I'd be, in jail. But it's not okay at all. And I don't understand. I mean, because if the shoe were on the other foot, and it is sometimes, we're not female, we're not perfect. Women do make mistakes or commit crimes or do terrible things, but equal opportunity for being bad and then being called out on it. And, I don't understand. I wish I had answers, but I don't. So I just want us to keep talking about it and take note when people are standing up and say, way to go, Chappelle, good for you. I don't own you, just because you're an artist.
I agree. And I don't even think it's necessarily being bad. It's just being human. I mean, nobody's perfect, and everybody is going to do something that somebody doesn't like, and they should not be vilified for it just because they're women. And I thought the whole thing with Dave Grohl was terrible, and I am now not a fan, and that will not change in a year.
Listen, well, that's fair. And look, I try so hard not to judge. Marriage is, I think it was in Downton Abbey, which I was watching the other night mourning Maggie's passing. But Lady Mary said, I think that marriage is, a novel, not a short story. And I was like, so true. Things happen. Okay, not judging, but when you're positioning yourself a certain way, actively positioning yourself this way and actively acting a different way in your private life, I do think that needs to be really called out. And I have to say, if the shoe were on the other foot.
Oh, can you imagine? No, and I mean, I agree with you. If he had not just published this memoir where he positions himself as this wonderful family man and his family is the most important thing to him, which I read about half of, then it would be one thing. But to do that and then come out with this, and in the middle of writing all of this, or your book coming out, all this other stuff was happening, that's the problem for me.
Yeah, right. And again, we need to hold everybody, I think, to the same standard, which maybe is a little bit like, okay, well, you don't, fine, whatever. I can still listen to your music or separate the art from the artist. I don't know. I've actually never been a Foo Fighters fan. I'm fiercely sort of team Courtney, who I know she made up with Dave, but I was always like, there's something there I don't know if I like. So I wasn't especially surprised, although I'm a terribly judgmental person. So when it comes, I'm I just want to be the equal, just as judgmental about everybody, not just, men or women. So yeah, I mean, it's just, but I think the bottom line is we have so much more work to do. And I think it's very important work that needs to be done, because we cannot just coast on this is how we've always done things. This is just the way it is. It is not right. And it's, I don't think, particularly mentally healthy for people even to be engaging with their fandom the way they are now, which is in this very strange ownership way.
Correct. No, I do agree with that. Well, on a happier note, how did you decide to name the band? I was fascinated by that. How did you come up with the name?
Yeah, I had different names. There was something, I think I got to find my notes. It was something like flaming Roman candle. It was terrible, Roman candles. I don't know what. It was something. And then I made it Dark City Lights, which was going to be the title of the novel. But then I was writing the scenes with Alice, Elijah's mom. And when she said that, lightning in a bottle, I was like, oh, this is it. This is the band. This is the title. I like to think I'm pretty good with titles too. So I think I know when I know, I know. So yeah, there, that moment I was like, yes, lightning in a bottle. Here it is. So
Because I think that would be such a hard thing to come up with. So I was curious how it all happened for you.
I think you also, I know there's so many ways of procrastinating or getting blocked as a writer. And one thing, if there are any aspiring authors listening, like sometimes you just have to go, you know what? This is a working title. It's going to come to me. I know it's not perfect, but I can keep going. I can start. And that's where I was. I was like, I'm pretty sure I don't have it. I think I had called it My Life. The book was called My Life or Yours at one point, like the song title, right? Like I knew it wasn't it. I just needed to get going. And the further you get into something, the more you give yourself over to it, then that great title will come to you.
Well, what about what surprised you the most when you were writing this one?
That's a good question. I think it's the way, I think what I was saying earlier about the way that Jane and Hen, their lives intersected in ways that I did not expect or plan. So, I wanted Hen to exist to teach Jane something about what she had been holding back on from, her fans, because she never really gave herself over to that, but also didn't realize that like she didn't have really any friends and this person was going to become her friend. And that relationship did surprise me. It was surprising too, because Hen does not get her own chapters. We're not with her except in the prologue, which I did for a few reasons. It's tricky in publishing when you have a teenage character. Often the marketing departments get a little nervous and they're like, what is this YA? So I didn't want to cause any confusion. And so I had to do it that way. But also I really felt like this is Jane's story. So let's just give her every single moment. But, Hen still was able to give so much to Jane. And then Jane, in return, the most, closed person in the industry who wasn't giving anything to anybody, ended up giving so much to her. And that was such a slow burn of a relationship. And it surprised me. And I think it's special because I think fandom can be not always pleasant for either person. There's obsession and it goes both ways, but ultimately there is a beauty in it. And I certainly experienced that with my feelings about Sinead O'Connor as a young tween and teen. It was deeply respectful and very loving in the way you can love someone who you don't know. I think there's a beauty in that. And that surprised me how poignant I always found that.
And it was interesting as Hen is beginning to get to know Jane and she's like, you're nothing like I thought you were going to be. And that is part of the fan relationship. You think about that. You love this person, you love their music, you want to know all about them, but you realize you really don't know them. You just know this persona.
Oh, totally. I think like I always my daughter is a Swiftie and I mean, we both kind of are, but I think it's fascinating and I could be completely wrong, but I feel like Taylor Swift has really leaned into the fact that everyone's just going to think her lyrics are always about her and her relationships. Sometimes they are, but I'm sure in some cases they just aren't. And she's like, that's fine. Let everybody think what they want. And it's just, there's nothing that she can do. Like, it's kind of like how it started with PJ Harvey's, Down by the Water. And I read an interview with her and she's like, people think I have a child who I drowned. Like, it's always, and she's like, I don't know, that's so weird. And particularly I don't know why, as a female artist, people always think you're talking about yourself. Always. Like, this one, I think people know that, I'm not a grunge musician or a heroin addict. So they're not like, what, but any domestic topics I've tackled, it's always like, oh, well, obviously this is you or your husband or your friend or your mother. And it's not, right? You're creating characters. I don't know what it is. Like, as women, it's like it's just expected that we could never come up with this from our imaginations. It's obviously just our lives.
Well, we talked about your title, but your cover, it's just stunning. Tell me all about how it came about.
Oh my gosh, I love that cover so much.
I do too.
Yeah, it's so perfect. So there were 3 options too. I remember I was actually it was so 90s. I was in a Levi's store buying jeans with my teenage daughter. And then the email came in that the cover mock-ups were ready for me to look at. And I couldn't wait. So I opened them on my phone and I actually screamed when I saw that one. And of course my daughter's like, what are you doing? Oh my God, like, what are you doing? And I showed her and she was like, wow. It's so perfect to me. It's Jane. That was the first time too, like I created this character and that is her. I don't know who that model is. But that's Jane. Like it's so great. And it looks like a 90s album cover. It's interesting too, because now so today is actually the UK publication day for the Lightning Bottles. They've used just the image of Jane without Elijah at the bottom there. Slightly different colors, still gorgeous. And then Indigo, which is our major bookseller here in Canada, they did an exclusive edition, different colors, same image. So seeing those different editions, it's so cool with that sort of same image, just interpreted differently. It's like special album editions or something.
I'm going to have to go check out the other couple ones. Well, Marissa, before we wrap up, what have you read recently that you really liked?
Okay, so I think I'm always reading several things at once, although I just finished what I think many people are reading right now, which is Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. I get into bad habits as a reader where sometimes I'm just like, give me plot. And I get a little lazy. So I had to really slow myself down and get reacquainted with these people who are so familiar. This book was just so worth it. The last chapter was just so perfect. She does so well. And I'm also reading How to End a Love Story by fellow Reese's Pick author Yulin Kuang. And it's so good. So great. It's so spicy and fun.
And we didn't even get to talk about the Reese stuff. I had wanted to, but it had to just be a dream come true.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I was saying in an interview yesterday, I think about it every day. I'm grateful for it every day. I think Reese is truly who she appears to be, deeply committed to changing people's lives and particularly female artists, accepting of how hard it is to make your way in this industry. And she's my patron saint. She's amazing.
She is amazing. I have followed her since she was young, and I just think she's outstanding. And I was so happy when she made her way into the book world and has made such a great impact.
And she's writing a novel with Harlan Coben.
I know. I'm so excited. When I saw that, I thought, okay, I'm a huge fan of his. I'm a huge fan of hers. This will be really fun.
It's going to be fun. Maybe you can get her on your podcast.
Oh, I know. The two of them together, that would be so fun. I would love that. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Thoughts from a Page podcast, Marissa. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Are you tired of seeing your teen or young adult struggle on a path that clearly isn't the right fit? Is your teenager confused about which direction to take after high school? The future of work is changing rapidly, and our kids need to know all of the options available after high school so they're empowered to make the choice that is best for them. In each episode, we explore the latest trends that are shaping the opportunities of today and tomorrow. I'm your host, Betsy Jewell, and this is the High School Hamster Wheel Podcast.
Coming up on 5 Minute News, I'm Anthony Davis. You might think it's partisan because maybe it's critical of one side or the other, but it's not. It's just the truth. And I think that's also something that's kind of unusual for Americans listening to the radio or to podcasts, because the news landscape in the States has been so partisan for so many decades. So 5 Minute News is verified, truthful, independent, unbiased, and essential world news daily.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. I would love to connect with you on Instagram or Facebook, where you can find me at Thoughts from a Page. If you enjoy the show and have a moment to rate it or subscribe to it wherever you listen to your podcasts, I would really appreciate it. It makes a huge difference. And please tell all of your friends about Thoughts from a Page. Word of mouth does wonders to help the show grow. The book discussed in this episode can be purchased at my bookshop storefront, and the link is in the show notes. I hope you'll tune in next time.
Hello, and welcome to Novel Conversations, a podcast about the world's greatest stories. I'm your host, Frank Lavallo, and for each episode of Novel Conversations, I talk to two readers about one book. And together, we summarize the story for you. We introduce you to the characters, we tell you what happens to them, and we read from the book along the way. So if you love hearing a good story, you're in the right place. Our 9th season is coming this fall. Tune in to hear from some of the all-time great authors, Charles Dickens, Jules Verne, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and more. Subscribe to Novel Conversations wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, I'm Emma.
And I'm Joe.
And we're the Professional Book Nerds. 2 Mondays a month, we interview authors and talk about their upcoming books, what drives them, and their go-to order at the cafe.
On Thursdays, we share recommendations and dive into topics readers face, like how do I actually read the books on my to-be-read list?
You can find the Professional Book Nerds podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Want to learn more about us? Our website is professionalbooknerds.com, and you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at ProBookNerds.
We hope you'll come and listen, and as always,
Happy reading.